Submission, faith, and patience, you conveyed the noble message, brought us light through your guidance. Peace be upon you, my beloved.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, his family and his companions forever. I begin with the greeting words of the righteous. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us to be Muslims and to have a desire to seek knowledge about our past and inshallah to implement that in our lives today, going toward the future. And this is what we call Fiqh Seerah. This is not just studying the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, but is getting an understanding of the life and the circumstances surrounding it and what we can extract from the different phases within Nubuwah, the prophethood, and then finally, once we extract information, how does that impact us today in the world that we are living in? And this is really important for not only students of knowledge, but I believe all of the Muslims, the whole community actually, and especially the leaders. And that is because with the geopolitical situation in the world, shifting to the Middle East, and televisions, internet, university courses, discussing Arabs, Persians, Shia, Sunni, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Syria, discussing different aspects of the Muslim world, sometimes without knowledge. It is important, especially for Muslims, to be grounded in the history of the region and to understand something of what happened before and to link it to what is going on today. And one of the best ways to do that, after going directly into the Book of Allah and the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is to look at the life of the messenger. Because when Aisha described him, she said, he is the Quran walking and talking. So if you want to see the living implementation of the Book of Allah, then look at his life. So this is what we want to see. But this story is given to us in a divine way. And as we understood in Surah Yusuf, verse 111, Allah Azza wa Jalla has told us, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, that in their stories, in the parables, there are lessons for those who have the ability to reflect, ulul albab. And so this is what we hope to be, ulul albab, those who reflect upon the circumstances and upon what came through the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And so we want to first get perspective. What was the world like before the coming of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him? And this is really important today, because here in 2016, we see that great tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And it may not be as great as what appears in the media, but it's like two big powers that are struggling, Arab, Persian. And one would say, like, why are they struggling like this? What is the purpose in this? But there's a background. And the more you understand about the background, the more we understand about what happened in earlier times, then we can begin to actually see what is happening today. And so in looking at the world before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I want to focus on four areas. The first being the Romans. And the great world powers at the time included the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Dynasty. in that region, there was also the great Axumite kingdom of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, and of course the Arabian Peninsula, and especially the Yemen. So we want to look at these areas in terms of a general background, because this is the center, the epicenter of where the revelation came, and then spread out to the other peripheries within the world. Now, normally when people say Roman and Rome, you would think about Rome in Italy. And that is the great Roman Empire of Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, that is probably one of the most widespread and powerful nations in the history of the world, especially European history. But what we're talking about here is what is called Byzantine Rome. And Byzantine Rome really, it's a continuation of the Roman Empire. When we look at what happened to the Romans, they enslaved the people around them, different nations, and especially in Europe itself, in the northern part of Europe, they enslaved the Germanic people, they enslaved Gothic people, they enslaved Slavic people. They didn't want to enslave people in England. Really surprising. Cicero wrote, he received letters from his generals, and they said that these people behind Hadrian's Wall, that's the UK, right, up there in the north, they are so barbaric, we can't civilize them. Don't take them as slaves. Don't even waste your time. See how things have turned around, right? But that's how they looked at the people in the far north there. And you have the Vikings, of course, in Scandinavia. But what happened was, because the Germanic people and the Slavic people were right on their borders, and they're very resilient nations, they eventually turned against the Romans, and they sacked Rome. And the word slave that we use in English actually came from Slav. So slavery was not just a color thing. The Slavic people, who were lighter skinned than the Romans, they were the slaves. So we still use the word slave, Slav, up until today. They were the slaves of the Romans. And they destroyed Rome. They sacked the capital. They were being used as slaves and gladiators. And it's a very bloody history as to what went on. And when Rome fell itself with its decadence, the power of Rome shifted. It shifted to the east, to another great city that was called Byzantium. That was the name of the city, Byzantium. Okay, and it was eventually changed to Constantinople. Constantinople means the city of Constantine. And if you look at your maps, you will see the Byzantine Empire we have in blue, and you can see the Roman, you see where Italy is here on this side. Okay, this is not showing up there. You'll see Italy here, Rome, and Constantinople on this side. Okay? So literally, the power shifted from Rome over to Byzantium, into that area. And Byzantium was probably the most protected city in this whole region. Huge walls, impregnable fortress. And so what they did was they wanted to protect their religion, to protect their leadership, their concept, their gods. And so they used this stronghold, the stronghold of Byzantium, to be a place where they would stay. And basically, as we know, the religion of the Romans was a belief in many different gods, gods for different purposes, the sun, the moon, for love, for war, for the ocean, and whatnot. But what was happening in the Roman Empire, and we want to focus slightly on this, is amongst the Jewish people, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, the son of Mary, may Allah be pleased with him, peace be upon him, he came to teach the Jews of Nazareth. So the Jews of Nazareth, especially, he focused in this area, and so they were called Nazarenes. We call them An-Nasara. Nasara. So that's the early term, because all of them were actually Jewish. And this is an important concept to have in your mind. The original Christians were all Jewish. They believed in one God. They had no concept of the Trinity. They did not eat the flesh of swine. They followed the law of Moses. And the Nazarenes spread out to different parts of the ancient world. They were focused in the area of Nazareth and Jerusalem, but they eventually spread out into different parts of the Mediterranean. Now, what happened in the early times, to give a basic summary for a long discussion, is that after Isa alayhi salam was raised, okay, after he was raised, we believe he was not killed or crucified, but it was made to appear that he was. After he was raised, an individual by the name of Saul, who was also Jewish and who was a good friend of many of the disciples of Jesus. So Saul, he was on the Damascus road, and there's Damascus now. And now you see why Syrian Christian refugees are so important to Christians today. You'd say, why are the Christians coming out like this? Because Saul, who changed his name to Paul, he claimed to find Jesus on the Damascus road. And he said it was like he saw Jesus in the sky and he got a type of revelation. And he changed his life. He changed his name from Saul to Paul. And he went with Barnabas, one of the disciples, and his friend, back to the disciples. They rejected Saul at first because he was against them. He tortured them. He opposed the disciples. He opposed Jesus. Now he has this new understanding. And what he did was he brought in what we call today in Arabic bid'ah. It's innovations. He brought new concepts in. He was trying to say that the message is not exclusive to Jewish people, but it originally was. They were all Jewish and they were not sent to teach the Gentiles. Isa alayhi salam was reforming the Jews, and the last message was reforming the children of Israel. And he was also expanding now with different concepts. And some of his concepts led to the divinity of Christ, the fact that Christ could be connected to God or part of God. It also led to the fact that we have an original sin, that every child is born with a sin. And there needs to be a divine sacrifice to get rid of that sin. So his bid'ah, his innovations, his way of looking at things opened the door for these major changes that came in their teachings. And Paul and Barnabas went to Greece, and eventually Barnabas left him there in Greece, and he continued his mission. And it was in that area of Greece and Rome that his followers began to be called Christians. Now this is different now. Before they were Jewish, but they were just the Jews of Nazareth. Now, Christian was being used. In other words, followers of Christ. That they were actually distinguishing between themselves and the other Jews. That we're something different. And that's the reason why a Christian today can look at a Jew and say, I'm a Christian and you're a Jew. But it's actually originally supposed to be the same. And so this new innovation spread to Greece, around Greece, Rome. It was spreading around the Mediterranean region. So the Christians at the time had many different concepts in their mind. You had Nazarenes, who believed in one God, who kept to the law of Moses. Then you have followers of Paul, the Christians. And then you have other groupings. There's an interesting grouping called, their leader was called Mithra, or Mithras, Mithraism. It's an interesting word to try to research. Because in Mithra, this cult which was in Rome and Persia, they believed that their leader died for the sins of people, that his holy day was Sunday, that his followers would put ashen mark on their head. They took a type of Eucharist or a type of baptism and a type of ceremony that they would take, eating his body and his blood and whatnot. If you really look at the change in the teachings of Isa alayhi Islam, you will see Mithraism being reborn within that. So the Mithraistic cult was there. Also the concept of Trinity. Trinity was the ancient Greeks. Plato had a concept of Trinity. The Egyptians had Horus, Isis, and Osiris. That was a three-part godhead. In India, they also had a type of Trinity as well. So the Trinity concept was in the ancient world. And at that time, with so much going on, one of the main leaders of the sun worshippers, because sun worship was the greatest of all of these cults, his name was Constantine. And Constantine went about uniting the whole of Christendom. He was really more a politician than anything else. And he used as his symbol the cross. Now, the symbol that you see on the board, on the screen, is called the Ankh. That is the Egyptian form of the cross. But the cross, even according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, this is old text, but this is what people use before they Google things and whatnot. But even in this ancient book now, it said the use of the cross as a religious symbol in pre-Christian times was almost universal and often connected with nature worship. So before the time of Jesus, the cross was like a symbol for eternal life. It was a universal symbol, had nothing to do with Jesus. So Constantine now needed a symbol that was a universal symbol and one that could symbolize this new cult. And so he brought in the cross. His followers would wear a red cross on their clothing. And he brought in new concepts. And he called a major conference in his capital, Constantinople. Now, Constantinople, again, was originally called Byzantium. That's where the word Byzantine Romans comes from, because of its city. Constantine changed it to the city of Constantine, Constantinople. And this here on the screen is the Hagia Sophia. And this church was the largest house of worship in the whole of the Western world. And it still is one of the major houses of worship on earth in terms of its expanse, its width and its height. And it was an amazing work in the city of Constantinople. And so Constantine then tried to gather the people together. One of the main individuals who was opposing Constantine was a man by the name of Arius. And Arius was a bishop of Christianity in the 4th century. And he was a Libyan. He was actually from Libya. But he based himself in Alexandria, Egypt. And of course, Egypt, the Nile region, was a very important place for Christianity. Because if you look at the Sinai Peninsula, right, and this is where Moses, got his revelation, and they say Jesus in his secret years, from when he was young until around in his 30s, they believe he was in the Sinai Peninsula. It's a very important place. And so it was in this region there that Arius' teachings spread rapidly. There were other teachers like him, but they were basically focusing on the belief in one God. So Arius was a Christian, but he refused the Trinity. He said that Jesus was a man, not God, not the Son of God. And that is the essence of their aqidah, their faith, is to believe in God coming down on earth and sacrificing his sin. He rejected all of that. And he said we should go back to the law of Moses. And Arius' followers were in Egypt. They were in the area of Palestine. They were in North Africa. There were other teachers like Donatus and other people in different parts of North Africa and Europe. And so Constantine's job now, he saw, was to unite the people together. And so he called a major council in 325 AD. And that council was called the Council of Nicaea. And this is a crucial date to understand the Byzantine Romans and Christendom in this part of the world. And it was in this conference that he brought together the representatives of all the different versions of Christianity. And they had to decide, are we going to have one God, three, many different gods? What book are we going to use? They had a lot of different gospels and books. Which book are we going to use? So in this conference, they decided that they would accept the Trinity as the main belief of Christendom. And they put together from the Gospels what is called the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It wasn't the original writing of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John who were disciples, somebody by the name who came later. But they tried their best, and they put together a compendium, an encyclopedia of religious texts, which included the Torah of Moses, the Psalms of David, historical writings, inspirations, the Gospels, and they called it Bible. Bible, like bibliothèque, it's a library. In Latin, that means a library. So this was literally a library of religious texts. They put it together in 325. So before 325, the Christians had no Bible. The Injil, the Gospels, were gone. They did not have the original Gospels. And it wasn't until this time, this key point, that they decided to put it all together and to unite it. Arius refused. And so in 336, he was poisoned to death. And hundreds and thousands of his followers were put to the sword. And in Christendom, they said, if you were a follower of Arius, if you did not denounce the teachings of Arius, if you do not say that God is three, then you are murted, you're an apostate, you're khawarij. You know, like really bad names that we have, like people outside of the faith. They use this word in English, heretic. If you speak to a Christian scholar about Arius, the first thing will come out of heretic. Okay, meaning somebody who's totally went outside of the religion. But if you ask him, why is he a heretic? Then he'll have to admit he did not accept the Trinity. That was his sin, which actually to us was a righteous act. So Arius and his followers, in a sense, were like Muslims before the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And they suffered. They suffered greatly during that time. And that was the basis of Rome. And so Rome controlled the Mediterranean basin, right? Their belief was what we call today Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Amongst the Christians, there's Eastern Orthodox. And you'll see some of their churches. For instance, if you go on Markham, just by the 401, and you see that building, it looks almost like a masjid or something. Right? That's Eastern Orthodox. Okay, and you'll see that their Christmas is not December 25th, it's like January 6th. They're different than the other church, but they were the ones that maintained the Roman Empire and what they thought was the teachings of Isa alayhi salam. Constantine, some people say he died as a sun worshipper. Others say he accepted Christianity. Allah knows best. But one of the biggest moves that he made was to institute that cross, was to put together that Bible, was to solidify the Trinity, to make Sunday as the holy day. See it? Sunday. You can see it right in the word. So instead of being Yom HaSabbat, the Sabbath, the Jews' day is Saturday. They're supposed to be fasting and reading the texts on Saturday. He changed it from Saturday to Sunday. That's the reason why up until today you have Christians who are trying to go back to the original teachings, a group called Seventh-day Adventists. And the Seventh-day Adventists do not have Sunday as their holy day. They have Saturday. And so that was the basis of one of the great empires of the world. It was a military power, and it was the representative of Christianity. On the eastern side was the Sassanid dynasty. And this dynasty, which ruled from around 224 to 651 AD, Sassaniyun. And they were inheritors of the great Persian culture, which stretched back thousands of years. Their belief was basically Zoroastrian belief. It was the belief in the sun as the main, God, and the manifestation of the sun comes through fire. So they would keep the sacred fire constantly going. That even affected the Greeks. And you see in the Olympics, they have the flame, right? So this is originally from them. And they were a very powerful dynasty. Their culture was an amazing culture. Their thrones and their palaces, they even had what they call the peacock throne, where you have peacocks walking around like we have in Ottawa, pigeons and things like that. And a peacock is like a beautiful bird, right? And so they have peacocks walking around and beautiful carpets and porcelain. And Persian culture is one that stretches back so many centuries. And you'll see it up until today in Iran itself. If you go to Iran or around Iranian people, highly cultured people in terms of their use of color and aesthetics. And this was really a great achievement of the Persian Empire. So the Sassanid dynasty, and if you look at your map, you'll see, it basically was that pink side there, and it was a huge dynasty. And that dynasty went right up into southern Russia, down into what is now today Afghanistan, Iran, and then over to Iraq. And you can see it goes up all the way into parts of Dagestan and then to the Mediterranean. And interesting, you see Yemen as part of the Persian Empire. And that's interesting today because now the Iranians are accused of supporting the Houthis, right? The Houthis of Yemen. Why would Persians be interested in Yemen? This is something we're going to see. So they have an ancient connection. And if you understand their connection in the past, then you'll understand it even today. What is present-day Gulf region and Oman, and if you know the Gulf Arabs, many of the Gulf Arabs are also Persian-speaking people. I lived in Bahrain for a year, and the Bahrainis typically, they'll speak Arabic, and I went to a lunch with them once, and they started speaking this language. I didn't know what they were to say. I can speak Arabic. They switched into Farsi, naturally. So that whole culture, and the same in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and many of these areas, you'll see that they are heavily affected by the Persian culture. That's an ancient connection with the Sassanid dynasty. It's an ancient connection. The Persian culture, this is one of their symbols of power and huge fortresses. They took over the Tigris and Euphrates region, which of course is Iraq, and one of the most wealthy areas there in that part of the world. And they represent the power to the east. Okay, so the Romans now to the north and the west of Arabia, eastern side, Persian Empire. Okay, these are the two great world powers. At the same time, there was a great African power as well. And again, if we look at the Red Sea in its relationship to Arabia, it's not really a major barrier. And so next to Arabia was a great empire called Axum. And the Axumite Empire, basically you'll see it there in what is now Eritrea, parts of Ethiopia, even parts of the Sudan, on the coastal region there. This is all parts of, maybe down even to where Djibouti is. It's getting near Hargeisa too. See Zela? It's getting near Hargeisa. Right, so this was the Axumite Empire. You didn't have divisions like you have today. And this was the most powerful empire at the time. And again, people don't understand Africa properly. They think the people are just backward people. But the reality was the ancient Egyptians, who were basically Africans, had probably the most powerful civilization in the whole world at the time. Building huge pyramids, having a complicated civilization, math, physics, science. The Abyssinians, Ethiopians, also had a very high culture as well. And it was a Nile Valley civilization. And the obelisk, which is that one piece of granite that is used as a sundial, and as also a symbol of power and authority. They had the largest obelisks in the world. Not in Egypt, it was in Ethiopia. Today, you'll see that everybody wants an obelisk. In Toronto, we have an obelisk. What is it? The CN Tower. And you'll see most of the cities in the world, they want an Eiffel Tower, a CN Tower. Some of them even stole it from Ethiopia and put it in their country. And it's literally a symbol of power and authority. And so this is a very important culture because it was similar to Arabian culture. The Red Sea is not a major barrier. If you're on the coast of Djibouti and these areas on a clear day, you can see Yemen. You can literally see it. So there's not a major difference in terms of land space and in the people. So the Axumite kingdom, they were a naval power, a military power. They were a trading power. They go back to 400 BCE. That's another way of saying BC, right? 400 BC, right? All the way up to the 10th century AD. That's a long time. This is a really dominant culture. And they believe, and you'll see in this slide here, you'll see that they actually believe, and this is a picture of a place in their center, which is called Axum up until today. It's in the Tigray highlands of Ethiopia. They believe the Ark of the Covenant is inside of this building. And that is that power source that Sulaiman alayhi salam, Sulaiman and Bilqis, that he had a chest where he kept the special teachings and whatnot. And they say this had power in the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ethiopians believe that it's here. And they won't let anybody inside of this place. Ethiopians also had powerful armies. They introduced a new form of warfare into the ancient world, and that is the use of elephants. And elephants completely changed warfare. In the same way that the tanks in armored cars and tanks in World War I, then World War II, and then later on helicopter gunships, and now drones, right? These are technologies. So when the elephant, if you have a camel or a horse, and you're about to fight your enemy, and suddenly there's 100 elephants in front of you, your animal is afraid. Your animal doesn't want to go forward. You're not used to seeing a creature like this. You shoot him with your arrow or your spear and it bounces off his skin. Okay, so this is a total new technology. It's like a tank. So the Ethiopian army was irresistible force. They were an irresistible force at that point in time. And this is really important to understand what was around the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. When certain moves, Allah gave him direction to make certain moves. If you understand the powers around him and what was going on, then we can see more about the revelation that we are constantly reading. Now the fourth place we wanted to look at was the Arabian Peninsula. And this gets into the word Arab itself. What is Arabi? Right? Arabi is an Arab who lives in the desert, in the Badia. But according to many scholars, and in different ways of dividing it up, I want to divide it into three parts. The first is called Al-Arab al-Ba'ida. And these are what you could say the perishing or the perished Arabs. And these are the nations like Ad and Thamud and Tassam and Amlaq, Madain Saleh, these ancient empires of the Arabian Peninsula. But their languages and their cultures basically perished. The only trace that I ever saw of this in my short travels, I found in the country of Oman. I went to Muscat and traveled around in Oman. And I found that the Omanis, they have people in Oman called the Jahiliyyah. It's the Jahiliyyah people. And they are speaking a form of Semitic language. And you don't know what they're saying if you speak Arabic. You know it's Semitic, but you can't fully follow them. It's an ancient Semitic language. Just like Amharic, which is spoken in Ethiopia, that's a Semitic language as well. Okay? So these Jahiliyyah people probably have the only existing Arabian tongue from the ancient times that is there. These are the great empires that are there. And I've given you in your text, in your one of your appendixes, you'll see an article written about the scientists, the University of California, who using technology focused down on the desert in the empty quarter of Oman. And they looked down, they were able to see through the sand, and they found an ancient city. These are Americans now, and I'm going to give you this article. And they're literally saying they believe it is Iram, the city of Iram, of the ancient Ad and Thamud. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi'ad? Iram, ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد. You'll see that in Surah, in Surah Al-Fajr. You'll see. Do you not see what happened to the people of Ad and Iram? ذات العماد. It had huge columns, and nothing was ever built like this in the land. That's what the Quran is saying. So literally, the scientists found Iram in what is called the empty quarter of Oman. And they actually dug down and saw the huge palaces there under the sand. And this solidified our understanding of Al-Arab al-Ba'ida. So this is the first kind of Arabs that you need to understand. And the Arabian Peninsula, this is again a look at the Arabian Peninsula. Oman, of course, is there on the right, and Bahrain, and this is your Arabian Peninsula. Now the next type is called Al-Arab al-Ariba. Al-Arab al-Ariba, we could say, is pure original Arabs. Pure original Arabs. Like the Qahtani people who came from Yemen and they went north. And the base that most historians believe that the Arabic language in its present form, because many believe there was an ancient form of Arabic that may have predated all languages. But in the present form that we are speaking today, the center of this would be what is now known as Yemen. And from their tribes, there were two very famous tribes, one the Himyar and the Kahlan tribes, very famous people. And it is from there that Arabic-speaking people then traveled around the peninsula and up into Iraq. And this was a high civilization. You can see in the buildings of Yemen, skyscrapers. Now these skyscrapers were there at the time when most people were living in shacks. And in Yemen, they literally had, look at the size of those buildings. You literally have like 10-story buildings. And these are ancient structures that are there. And if you Google it, go into Yemen, the ancient buildings of Yemen, you'll see some amazing buildings in Hadramaut and in different sections of Yemen. So this is a powerful ancient culture that we'll talk about a little bit more as we go further on. The third type of Arab that we want to talk about is Al-Arab al-Musta'riba. So this is the third kind. And this is what you could call Arabized Arabs. Now what do I mean by that? I mean somebody who speaks Arabic. They've taken on Arab culture, but they were not originally from Yemen. So their bloodline does not go into the bloodline of the Yemen where the original speakers of Arabic came from. And of course, Arabic has now spread. And if you go to Lebanon, the Lebanese are Phoenician people. They were in Carthage and other places. And if you go to Morocco and Algeria, they are Berber people, Amazigh. They have their own language and their own culture. And if you speak to somebody from, I've seen a Lebanese, speaking, try to speak to a Moroccan, they can't understand each other. Because literally, their own languages, their dialects have influenced Arabic itself. And so they would be called Al-Arab al-Musta'riba. So the Lebanese would be Phoenician people who came into Arabic language and Arab culture. Okay, and this is important because, again, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Because some people say, well, Arab is something special. But if you look at the Arab al-Musta'riba, they're not the pure ones, right? But who are the most famous Arab al-Musta'riba? If you look at the family of Ismail alayhi salam, right? Ismail, remember, his mother was an African woman from Egypt, Hajar. May Allah be pleased with her. The father is Ibrahim alayhi salam, who's an Iraqi. So that's Tigris-Euphrates blood. That's Nile Valley blood, African blood. And Ismail marries from the Jurhum tribe, and they are Arab al-Araba. They're the original Arabs. So the children that come out of this union between the different civilizations, they become the Quraysh. They become Quraysh. And Quraysh was considered to be the nobility of the Arabs. But they're not original Arabs. They're Musta'raba. You see? So Arab itself is not a racial thing. There is no set racial definition for an Arab. It could be light skin, dark skin, brown, yellow. However, in their traditions, they do like many of the Arabs, especially in the peninsula, they like what they call shummul unuf. They like to have a big nose like. That wouldn't go so well in China, right? But they like to have shummul unuf. They like a high bridge nose, right? A high forehead. There's certain features that they do like, but that's not all of them. It's not a racial group, okay? It's more of a linguistic, cultural group. But if you want Arab al-Araba, if you want to get into a tribal racial thing, then you'll have to go to the people who were rooted in Yemen and now in Arabia itself, okay? So these are the three forms of what the Arabs actually are. And it has spread out to different parts of the world. And even the Prophet ﷺ even said an Arab is one who speaks Arabic. That's what an Arab really is, from his point of view. He didn't want to make it into just a tribe or a particular thing. Now people got their passports and they want to say, I am the true Arabs, or you're not really an Arab, you're half Arab, you know, whatever. It's really a broad-based group there. I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody may have concerning this. These are the three types of Arabs, the Arabian Peninsula. So you have the ancient Arab al-Ba'ida, the original, and then you have those who are Arabized. Now as we continue looking at the Arabian Peninsula, we recognize even the concept of Arab itself. It has something to do with wastelands and desert, barren type of land. You know, this is generally how it is set up in terms of, you know, somebody who lives within these areas. And the Arabian Peninsula itself was unique in that it did not really have universal laws. It was really based upon, it was a tribal society that had its laws based upon power and organization. So there was no set of laws that the people could refer to in terms of you know, where they would get their legislation from or how they would relate to each other. And that was generally the Arabian Peninsula. So when people of Rome, on one side Persia, on the other side Ethiopia, looked at the desert, you generally go around the desert. You generally go by the sea or by the coast, but not many people would go to the interior and go through Arabia because it was known as a barren place that did not really have any set rules or laws. Yemen was different. And this is important because, again, today, terminologies change and times change. And people would look at Saudi Arabia as being very, very rich, and the Gulf rich, and Yemen being very poor. You think Yemenis are very poor. But it's the opposite. Yemen was the powerful society. Yemen had skyscrapers. Yemen had international trade. And the trade that went along the coastlines, especially the trade that happened as a result of a natural sap that would flow out of trees, this frankincense. Okay, and this Luban, frankincense and myrrh, it was a special thing, like Canadians have maple syrup. So this sap literally drips out of the trees in Oman, and you have a form of it that you can burn, and the smoke clears your room. It's a nice smell, and it clears the air. And people in other cultures, actually believe, up until today, that this clears the air. I was in a store just recently, one of the main stores here in Toronto, and there was a section, and they were Hindus, and they were selling frankincense and myrrh. And they said, it's good for, and they started naming a number of Hindu rituals. And if you want to wash your house or get away evil spirits and negative vibrations, you burn frankincense. So up until today, within Hindu culture, they have this concept. So the Greeks, the Romans, the Hindus, the Buddhists, many people, there's something about the smell of the frankincense. And so what that did was, it gave them a product that would constantly bring in revenue, because you burn it and it goes away. It's easy to store. You can carry it thousands of miles. It's like a stone. And then there's a gummy form of luban also, and you chew it, and it cleans your mouth. So that's the first Wrigley's chewing gum, juicy fruit. That's your first chewing gum, was from there. Also, because of what the Ethiopians had found, they found their sheep jumping around at the goats in the middle of the night, wide awake. They were eating this berry. And so they took the berry themselves and they boiled it, and it kept them awake. And the connection between Ethiopia and Yemen was there, and it spread across. Okay, and that is coffee. So that's literally where coffee comes from. So your Tim Hortons, you're actually drinking an Arabian drink. Now, how many Canadians know America, when you go to New York, it says Dunkin' Donuts rules, right? How many know that they're drinking, this is a Muslim Arab drink originally. The Turks then took it and made it internationally. So the Arabian Peninsula then, there was a high culture in the south, but the rest of it wasn't really so well known to the rest of the world at that time. They considered it to be a barren wasteland. And in Yemen itself, one of their last great kings, his name was Dhu Nuwas. And the faith of Christianity and Judaism had spread down there, and he was actually of the Jewish faith. He was against, he left his idol worship and came into this belief. But at the same time, if you study what the Quran says about magic, it said that the first magic entered into the world, and you'll see it in Surah Al-Baqarah. It was in a place called Babel. And one of the first groups that dabbled with it were the children of Israel, to the point where they accused the Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam of being a magician. But the Quran, again, in that chapter, clears him. He was not involved in magic, but it were two angels, Harut and Marut, who actually came down and taught it as a test. So what many of the Jewish groups call this form of magic today, they say Kabbalah. It's the Kabbalah. So you can be a practicing person practicing Judaism, but you can get into magic. The same way you can be a practicing Muslim and then start to get into forms of sihr, forms of magic that we have within our own communities and our own understanding. And so this king in Yemen, in the area of Yemen, it would be more toward the western side, he had a sorcerer. And so he would believe in God, but at the same time, he took some strength from his sorcerer. And the sorcerer was getting old. So he needed to train somebody else to work in his palace. And so he found a young boy, Abdullah ibn Thamir, and it's a long story, but he basically sent the boy to get some training in magic, in sihr. And as the boy went along the road, he met a monk, Famiyun is the name that many historians come. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim that actually talks about this. So he met the monk Famiyun on the road, and he was impressed by the belief of this monk. He was a very strong Christian. Now remember, the Christians, you had those that were in the Trinity, and then you had the Arius, the followers of Arius, right? And you'll find these Christians in different parts of the world. The Prophet ﷺ later on, we'll find, met a monk on the road, Buhaira, right, who was a Christian. So these Christians, sometimes they're Nestorians, and They're the believers in one God. So this Famiyun, he was one of the believers in the Creator, very pious person, and he taught the boy to believe in one God. So the boy was actually not so impressed by the sorcerer, but he had to make the king think that he was going to the sorcerer. So he was living these two lives and going along, and there's different riwayahs, but in the riwayah of Muslim, it speaks about a huge creature that was on the road, and the boy wanted to test who was stronger, the sorcerer or the Christian, the believer in one God. And so the people could not pass the road, and he took a stone. He said, "In the name of, God, in the name of the God of the monk," and it killed the creature. And the people, recognized this. The information got back to the king. He was upset. Do you have another God? You're not worshiping my God, and you're not going to the sorcerer. The sorcerer, or the monk, had told the boy, "Whatever you do, don't tell him who I am." Okay, but, and again, it's a long story. The boy was tortured and whatnot, and finally they found out who the monk was. And the monk was also, brought to the king, and he was tortured, and they wanted to, it actually says in some of the riwayahs that they took the king, it's a little gory, by the way, they took the monk, and they literally put a saw on his head and said, "Renounce your religion." He refused. And they sawed him in half. But he would not give up his faith. Also, one of the courtiers, who was also, who had accepted Christianity, the belief in one God, he refused to leave his belief, and they sawed him in half. They came to the boy, and the king said, "Take him to the mountain and throw him off. Test him first." So they took him to the top of the mountain, and he refused, to believe in their gods, to renounce his faith, but the mountain shook, and all the people fell off the mountain, and the boy came walking down again to the king. So he said, took him to the ocean. Put him on a boat, test him, throw him in the ocean if he doesn't renounce his faith. The boy refused to renounce his faith. The waves came, threw everybody off the boat. The boy was alive. He came back to the king. So finally the boy told the king that if you want to take my life, there's one way you can do it. Get all your people out on a field, tie me to, a tree, take my bow, shoot this arrow, which has the name of God on it, say in the name of the God of the boy, and then let everybody see this, and then you can take my life. So the king was really glad. He brought everybody out there, said this statement in the name of the God of the boy. So this is clearly saying Allah, like the creator. He shot it, the boy died, and everybody accepted Christianity. The opposite of what the king wanted. So the king was really upset because of this. And he dug a ditch, and he literally took the people to the ditch. Some of them he killed with the sword, others he tortured to death, and others he literally built a huge fire in the ditch, and he threw them in the ditch. And this hadith, which is in Sahih Muslim, comes as the sabab al-nuzul, the reason for the revealing of Surah Al-Buruj. And this is chapter 85, and you'll see right in the beginning, وَسَمَا إِذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَعُودِ وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. So it says that, with the sky and its zodiacs and the promised day, the people of the trench were killed. And it goes on to speak about how they sat by the trench, and their lives were taken only because they believed in Allah. So you can go back and read Surah Al-Buruj. This is your background for the chapter. And it is said from the hadith that they were so strong in their faith that a woman came with a young baby, and she stepped back because she had a baby. There's a fire. And the baby said, "Go forward. Right? Believe in, it's all right." And then they went into the fire. And so this was a terrible slaughter. Some accounts say it was about 20,000 Christians were killed by this Dhu Nuwas. And because of this, the word got out to the Romans. Now remember, the Byzantine Romans, remember your setup in the world. The Byzantine Romans they saw themselves as the custodians of Christianity. So the emperor called Justinian, he's a famous Byzantine Roman emperor, he sent word up the Nile because they knew that the teachings of Christianity had gone up the Nile from Egypt into the Sudan and all the way up into Al-Habasha. So they sent their emissary and they said, we are giving you the responsibility to take revenge. 20,000 of our people have died. So we want you to send one of your irresistible armies. It was known to the Romans how powerful the army of the Axumites was. And so the Axumites sent their general, his name was Arius. And his order was to kill 1/3 of the men, lay waste to 1/3 of the country, and seize 1/3 of the women and children. And he carried it out. And Dhu Nuwas rode his horse into the ocean. And he was never seen again. And Arius himself, there was a conspiracy within his ranks. And his assistant, Abraha, took over the power of the Ethiopian army through deception. Abraha was a person hungry for power. And he established in Yemen a place called Al-Qulais. And the Qulais was a type of cathedral. It was something to rival the Kaaba. Because remember, the Kaaba that was built by Ibrahim alayhi salam, originally for the belief in one God, and we'll talk about what happened to it. But that was known as a religious center. And so Abraha then built the Qulais to rival the Kaaba itself. And it is said that some of the Arabs, they defiled this structure and put filth inside of the structure. And with that, Abraha made the intention to attack the Kaaba. Okay? And he literally set out from the southern part, from Yemen, heading north. And it's interesting because the Saudis actually, in their museum, they actually found some of the writings of Abraha on the side of a mountain. It's in the Ethiopian language, Ge'ez, which is their Semitic writing. In Ge'ez, it's the writing of Abraha, who was going south-north, heading toward Mecca in order to get revenge. And it's interesting because as he moves along, the word is going to Mecca. And the Arabs at that time, they were good merchants and traders. They had no major army. They had no way to defend themselves. And when they finally reached at the outskirts of Mecca, Abdul Muttalib, part of the Hashemite Banu Hashim, who we'll be speaking about, grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, he came out to do negotiations. And Abraha basically said, submit. Submit. Because he had an irresistible force. He had elephants. This is like you're surrounded by tanks. So he said, submit to us. And Abdul Muttalib basically said his famous word. He said, I am the Lord of camels. But this house has a Lord, and that Lord will protect it. Okay, these are his famous words. And the Arabs went up into the mountains. And by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some reports say that when the elephants, now getting close to Mecca, when they faced them toward the Kaaba, they sat down. They wouldn't go any further. If they face them south, they'll start walking. If they face them in any direction but going toward the Kaaba, they will walk. And then birds came. And again, this is the Sabab al-Nuzul of the 105th chapter, Surah Al-Fil, right? And this is where Tayran Ababil Tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. So these birds carrying baked clay at high altitudes. And again, if you have a small object and you take it to a high altitude and drop it down, it gains weight. And by the time it hits, it's like a bomb. So they literally bombed the army of Abraha. And it is said a virus and a pestilence also spread amongst his ranks. And they headed south, and his army was totally decimated. And when the remnants of the Ethiopian army reached Yemen, they didn't have much power at all. And it is reported that one of the Himyaris, his name was Saif Dhul Yazan al-Himyari. He was one of the Yemeni people leaders. He went to Persia and he negotiated with the Kisra, who was the emperor of the Persian Empire. Now remember how that map was set up, and it said that Persia had Yemen, right? He negotiated with the Kisra, and the Kisra then sent his army, and he totally defeated what was left of the Abyssinian army. And the Persians took over Yemen, and they ruled it for approximately 72 years. They ruled Yemen. So in their thinking, as part of the Persian Sassanid dynasty, and this is the final dynasty before Islam came, they see Yemen as part of their dynasty. And that is part of the reason why many of the Arabs on the Arabian Peninsula are very defensive now in terms of Iranian intervention in the war of Yemen. There's all kinds of factors in this. But this is something that the average people don't know had actually gone on. And it's interesting because this history is the background for the Quran itself. So when we are reading Surah Al-Buruj, when we are reading Surah Al-Fil, it's not just a nice chapter with nice rhythm to it. If we understand the meaning of it, you are actually getting a deep historical narrative about what happened in the Arabian Peninsula. And this is important information that literally sets the stage for what is happening in the world today. And so the attack on the Kaaba, the events that are going on, it sets a major stage for what is about to happen. This is a traumatic event, a major trauma going on in the whole region. And it's important to understand that the people in the region itself, their culture, although it was not known to the world, there is something to the culture that we need to know. But this year, when it happened, this is called Am al-Fil. So this is the year of the elephants. It would be 570 AD, and that is the year when the Prophet ﷺ was born. So he was born on Am al-Fil. It was a major event. It's like they say September 11th, right? Or, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. That's what it is for, North Americans. Whatever, there's different big events that happen in the world. So this is like a major event that everybody remembers in the whole region. It was Am al-Fil, the year of the elephants. And that is very important to understand. But to understand the people who lived in that region, we need to step back for a moment and just look, at their culture. There's not a lot of information that's available for us because they basically had an oral culture. So it comes through oral traditions, poetry, a few things written down, but it's not, a lot of information that we can really get a lot of details. But we do recognize the fact that it was Ibrahim alayhi salam and his family who built the Kaaba in Mecca. That region was a desolate region. It had a well, the well of Zamzam. Some of the travelers knew about the well and they would stop. But when Ibrahim alayhi salam settled around it and the Kaaba was built, it became literally a center of movement. So as you're going from south-north, you would naturally pass by there to refresh yourself and to meet other people. So it became like a very important center, and that was known as Becca, which eventually turned into Mecca. But the problem that developed is that although it was originally set for the belief in one God, the Arabs eventually went back into idol worship. And this is a weakness that people have when they start to forget about the creator of the universe, of the creation, and they start to give power to the creation itself. Okay? And this is very important because we are still plagued by this type of activities where people put a lot of emphasis on stones and on physical things, the barakah, like the blessings that are in the stones. And what they would do at that time is that they would make a type of pilgrimage to the Kaaba from all around the Arabian Peninsula. And they would take back a stone, bring it to their village. They believed that they were actually bringing a type of barakah or blessing. And they would literally set it in a place, and eventually an idol would be set up. And this was the basis of idol worship around the Arabian Peninsula. And you find that based upon that, there was an idol, they set up an idol from Syria itself by the well in the middle of the Kaaba. And this was Isaf and Na'ilah. So they were switching idols back and forth. Al-Uzza was in a place called Nakhla. This is outside of Mecca. Al-Lat, right, one of their famous gods was in Ta'if. Ta'if's high in the mountain in the south, right? Manat was worshipped by the Aus and the Khazraj in Yathrib, which was Medina. So they had Manat. Yahuth was in Jurash. Ya'uq was in Hamdan and Nasr. This is in Yemen, in Himyar country. So they had the so-called gods called Ya'uq and Yahuth. So they would seek blessings from the idols, touching it, and then they would go back to the Kaaba to renew their blessings. So that was the type of Jahili, they use the word Jahiliyyah, meaning ignorance. It's a type of Jahili pilgrimage that they would literally make. And that's the reason why you'll find in some of the traditions, there are people who are making a type of umrah and a type of pilgrimage. They didn't have the same pilgrimage season like us, but they would go. They would literally go. They didn't have the rules like us. They would go around the Kaaba sometimes without clothes on. So they had a completely different concept of what they were doing, and they're going for their idols. Until it reached the point where in the Kaaba itself there was about 360 idols. So they literally had idols for every day of the lunar calendar. But one of the important aspects that we need to recognize, could not look at all the negative points of Arabian society, and that is that they actually had good qualities as well. They had self-devotion. They would, they worshipped seriously through their prostrations, and some of them really believed in their idols. It's not a strong belief, but it's something that people fall into in many parts of the world. And many idol worshippers, if you ask them, do you worship the idol? They say, no, it's an intercessor to God. So the concept of Allah was there amongst the Arabs. And this is an important point to know, because there was an Orientalist named Robert Morley who in the 80s and 90s, he was putting out booklets against Islam, and he said that Muslims worship a moon god. And they say it's Allat. If you think of the Arabic, how Allat is written, and Allat becomes Allah. So it was a moon god. That's where Allah comes from. But what the rebuttal to Robert Morley is, at the time when Allat was worshipped, Allah was also worshipped, because Allah was already known from the Kaaba itself. So it was not an evolution from one into another. What they would do is they would do what we call shirk, and that is you go through one source to the major source. So it's setting up partners, not atheism. They believe in the Creator, but they believe that you should go through earthly sources in order to get to the Creator. And so they would perform pilgrimages, they would make sacrifices, they had special animals, special food and drink. They believe very much in fortune telling. They're very superstitious. So if you're going on a journey and you see a certain bird fly across, then it's a good journey. But if you hear an owl making its hoot, then you turn back. So there's certain birds that would give them good luck and bad luck. And we Muslims have inherited some of this and carry it even in our cultures up until today. In some Muslim countries, I don't want to say which one it is to bother people, but in one country, if a rooster in the morning faces your house and then crows, rooster, then somebody's going to die in the house. So there's beliefs like this in birds, okay, and different animals. And that's in most of the cultures of the world. And the Arabs were very much into that. And they were also very much into gambling and intoxication. So all of these factors, and of course when you're drinking, adultery comes with that, murder, all types of things, come from the drinking of alcohol. But what they did have, which was to their favor, is that, and this is one of their greatest qualities, it is karam, it is hospitality. And they were famous for hospitality. And you can understand that too, because if you're living in a desert area and somebody comes along, that person really needs help. And so the greatest thing you can do is to give that person water, right, to show them hospitality. And they survived by that, because otherwise you're not going to survive. I remember I was in Norway, and in the north of Oslo, when it becomes really, really cold in Norway, there's a rule: if you are driving on the road and the temperature is above like -30 or whatever it is, they have a certain point. If you see somebody on the side of the road, you have to stop. You cannot allow that person. If you do and they catch you, they can take you to jail, because that person's going to die shortly when the temperature reaches a certain level. And so that's their lifestyle. They don't care who you are. They'll stop and they'll let you in and drive you to the hospital. So the Arabs living in, having this empty quarter in this huge desert that they had to cross constantly in order to get to the coastlines, karam was a very important part. And within their poetry, which they loved so much, that was one of the qualities, one of the greatest qualities that a person could have, and that is to be very kind and very generous. And they also believed in keeping a promise. If you were a trustworthy person, they would respect you. And that's why they would call the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ before his prophet Al-Amin, because they knew that he would keep his promises. And it's a very important quality amongst them. And they had a strong sense of honor. And their honor was normally based upon their tribe. But they're very much into their honor and their dignity of their family. They would literally die for the dignity of their families. And so these are very strong qualities that they had. And because of the desert life that they had to struggle with, they had patience. In that really hot climate and traveling, so they had a lot of forbearance and patience, and that was considered to be a great quality. Also, obviously, there's difficulties. Courage, shuja'ah. Courage is considered to be, one of the qualities that you find in their poetry also, when they speak about people who are very strong and courageous. And their life was, it was a simple life, but in a sense, it had purity to it, because there wasn't a lot of contraptions around and a lot of things. It was very much the sky and the earth and like that. So there was a type of purity about them, although they had been corrupted in other ways. And this may be why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them. Again, we don't know why, but that may be why Allah chose them. Because you could get the message to them fast. If somebody has a complicated culture, and they have all layers within their family and society and their understanding of the world, it takes a while to get to them. But for this culture was simple enough that you could touch a person's heart. You could say something to them, read something to them in their language, and they would literally be influenced by this. Okay? And this gave them a very strong advantage linguistically in their poetry, and also in some of the concepts that they had in dealing with people. They know how to read people. And again, these are all factors in the success of the revelation, because we need to understand how this revelation was so successful. how within a 23-year period, the whole of the Arabian Peninsula now basically comes under Islam. This is impossible task before. No armies, no culture has ever done anything like this in the Arabian Peninsula. So these are all the factors in the Jahili period. This is sort of your stage which is set for the coming of the revelation. And inshallah next week, we want to begin to look at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself, his lineage, where he came from, and then to understand how he fits into this society, which had extremes, so many extremes, but yet was surrounded by superpowers like we are surrounded today. So I want to open up the floor for any general questions anybody has concerning anything there.
Regarding adultery, we see that now in many cultures coming back in the form of people going to the shrines and to the graves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when it's destroying families. I mean, I have personally seen back home when I visited that the family is broken, but they would put money into the shrine, or they would go to the shrine on a special occasion.
Right.
Now it's almost has become like a special festivity day for them to go there and ask for prayers and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, the question is concerning adultery and different practices and how it's affecting people today. We can say to a certain extent that every culture has Jahiliyyah. Everybody has negative qualities within their culture. And people are really closer, or more similar than what we actually think. And there's a weakness in human beings, to worship created things as opposed to the Creator. And also to follow their physical desires. Because we have physical desires, our need to survive is considered to be one of the greatest drives that a human being has. So when we're fulfilling this need to survive, right, and then fear that comes in, this is where you'll find in many parts of the world that people revert to idol worship very quickly. You see in the time of Musa alayhi salam, he was up on the mountain, visiting his Lord. They had, already gotten, word of the revelation. By the time he came down, they had built an idol. He couldn't even come off the mountain. And he's a prophet. And they were already worshiping an idol. So that's the weakness in human beings. Okay, and this is why when a culture is very straightforward and very clear and has courage to it, there's certain qualities about the Arabian Peninsula. Really need to study. We're going to be looking at these qualities and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this personality, and this area of the world. If you think about the Arab horse, for instance, the Arabian steed is one of the best horses in the world. Even people who gamble on horses in races, they see how much Arabian blood is in that horse. Because the Arabian horse, compared to other horses, it's courageous and it's powerful. It has patience and it moves fast. It's like when you see the European horse, the big giant, horses there, and then the Arab is like a Lamborghini running around a Ford pickup truck. It's like they could travel long distances and the horse doesn't need a lot of water. And then the camel, of course, which is great creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah chose these people and chose this environment in order that the message would move out rapidly to all of humanity. Because remember, the Quran is not only for the Arabs. So therefore, there's got to be a way for it to get out of the Arabian Peninsula, cross the cultural barriers of the world. And so this is what we understand with our Fiqh Seerah. We now have more understanding how Islam spread around the world. Right? It gives us a better understanding of the historical reality. Now, floor is open for any other general questions anybody may have. Yeah. Go ahead.
To what extent was ancient Arabia, impacted by other societies? Were they in connection with various societies and culturally in various ways?
Yes, they were to a certain extent. Because if we look at Arabia again, it tends to be in the coastal areas. The center, especially by the empty quarter, is not so many people. I mean, the part that's called Nejd, really, there's a huge valley. Wadi Hanif is a huge valley, and there's a lot of agriculture, actually, in the area called Nejd. But it depends upon where they were. So the people who were living close to Iraq, they were influenced by Persian culture and the culture of the Mesopotamia. The people who were living in Yemen, they were influenced by Ethiopia, Habasha, the Red Sea, and that part of the world. The people who were living in Syria, and there's different tribes, like Banu Ghassan, the Ghassanids, they were living in the north by Syria and Jordan. So they were influenced very much by the Roman Christian type culture. So it did have an impact on them. Even Egyptian culture had an impact to a certain extent. But because of the vastness of the land, and because of the lack of universal laws, they didn't really solidify anything, as you'd see in other parts of the world. And that maybe was to their advantage in being able to accept the message of Islam. Because some people today, up until today, who have accepted Islam, they still maintain some of their practices from their old religion. And that's the problem we get into when we analyze our cultures and we look for shirk, polytheism. You see, much of the polytheism is ancient practices. People used to worship trees, they used to worship saints, they used to worship the sun god, right? So somehow they put it into Islam. So they give it an Arabic name, right? That's their Jahiliyyah culture, right? And so, but in the Arabian Peninsula, it was an advantage that they didn't have a complicated culture, because then they were able to make a transition, a fast transition. And then when they travel to different parts of the world, they absorb other cultures. So literally we're going to see as Islam spreads, it absorbs Roman culture, Persian culture, Egyptian, Ethiopian, Chinese. It absorbs. So the Arabs had that ability. Their language, Arabic, uses more parts of the mouth than maybe any other language on earth. So if you can speak Arabic, you can learn to speak other languages fast, because your throat's already open. If you speak English in America or Canada, you're crippled. You have a problem with languages, because you're not using the front of your mouth. Right? But Arabs are using everything. So they go and they intermarry, they learn other languages, become part of the culture fast. This is all the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, any other general questions anybody has? Yes, brother.
The Jahiliyyah type of action dominant in India for the last 40, 50 years, and they also think that it's a practice which is really Islamic, and they keep on doing shirk after shirk.
Yeah.
And it's like a big business, but I don't know, somewhere or the other, every time I'm going, I'm finding worse than previous.
That's right. I mean, you find
Ulamas and so on,
yeah,
but it's still, yeah.
very strange things you find. I mean, when I was living in South Africa, the Muslims were Cape Malays, and they had this practice called cutting the rumpies. Cutting the rumpies happens in the spring season, and then they would cut these citrus fruits and whatnot, and they would make nice type of bouquets, and the men would wear it, and then they cut these rumpies and whatever. When we studied the rumpies, it's a Buddhist tradition. It's from Buddhism that they brought with them, incorporated into Islam, and then made it an Islamic practice, not knowing where it came from. So there's a lot of things that we have. That's the study of Tawheed and Shirk, where you have to go into your culture and filter out the bad aspects of it. Maintain your culture, but just take out the parts that lead you into idol worship and shirk. So alhamdulillah, we hope inshallah to be able to continue. And next week we want to look at the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ and begin to see his early life and how he fits into this scenario that we have set up. And think about this scenario when you look at the news and you see, Saudi Arabia fighting Yemen and Iran fighting Saudis and this one, that one. Now, when you start to understand this. You can see some of the rivalries that are there from the past, and you could also see some of the major mistakes and insanities that Muslims, in some extreme parts are actually in today. This gives more clarity. And we hope, inshallah, to continue with our fiqh seerah. So I leave you with these thoughts. One more question you have?
It just seems like the Westerners are studying more about this than us, if that's how they're trying to invade.
That's right. And this is what Muslims need. We need to study this. We need to know our background, to know where we're going. Right? It's very important, not to leave this. People look at seerah as just a nice fairy tale that you tell your children at night, or whatever, on a special occasion you read the things, No, this is like information that's going to help us figure out what's happening today. So I leave you with these thoughts. Have a safe journey home. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.